Hello arty peoples and welcome to another episode of Jerry's Live. My name is Emmy Klein and I am your host this evening. Now today I have a really fun, kind of a basic class on India ink and kind of the different techniques that we can use to create artwork with them. It's something that's a little near and dear to my heart. It's one of the mediums that I actually started off with when I was just starting to create art. So it's really good for artists of all levels and artists of all different types of techniques and styles. This really lends itself well to all different, genres of people doing artwork. So I'm excited to share this with you. Now, before I jump into today's class, I just wanted to remind you that if you are interested in anything that I'm going to be using today, make sure to go to the website, JerrysArtarama.com, and type in today's class code, which is JL338. Now, if you type that in the search bar on JerrysArtarama.com, JL338, the teacher's cart should come up, and then you'll be able to check out all the supplies over there. So let's jump into India ink. Now, India ink, to begin with, is a soot-based ink. That means it's an organic material that is burnt and processed. It's a really arduous process to actually get it to be so finely ground down that it's going to actually be suspended enough to not settle down on the bottom of whatever it is that you're jarring it with. But once they grind it down to such a fine level, it can be suspended in essentially to make ink. Today I'm going to be using the New York Central India ink. It's one of my favorites. I love it so much because it is a waterproof ink that is super black. And those are the things that I typically look for when I'm looking for an India ink. I want it to be really, really dark when it comes straight out of the bottle. And I want it to be waterproof. Now, some inks out there can say they're water resistant. And if it doesn't have the word waterproof on it, which literally, don't mind my messy bottle, but it literally says waterproof on the label, that means that it will not reactivate once it is fully dry on your paper. Now, if it says water resistant, that means it does resist a little bit of activation once it gets wet again, but it's not 100%. Well, then, of course, you also do have like calligraphy inks that don't say anything, and that's because they are going to absolutely reactivate just like a watercolor would. It'll flow right back over again. As soon as it's like fully dry on your paper and you add more water, it's gonna start moving again. So waterproof is something that I personally look for. It's just something that lends well to all the techniques that I do. Now, we are artists. We are all looking for very different things. So if you happen to work well with an ink that reactivates, that's great. But just be aware of those are the things that you're going to have to kind of deal with if you don't get a waterproof ink. So I have right here this is the Watercolor Painter's Color Diary. I'm going to actually show it here. This right here is what I'm actually using for my swatches for the ink. Yes, it is watercolor swatch paper, but ink is really great as far as like kind of a crossover between watercolor. It is a water-based media. You add a lot of water to it to do some different techniques, so I like to use watercolor paper when that's concerned. But as far as swatching and doing like my little scratches and things like that, this is a really great way of swatching it out. And actually, if we go to that overhead view, you guys can see a little bit more of what I'm talking about. There we go. Okay, so you can see a couple different things here, and I'm going to go over each little technique more in depth so that you can see kind of how they're done. Now, before I jump into that, I want to talk about the paper, because your paper really does make a difference when it comes to working on, like in ink specifically. Again, I'm going to be using a watercolor block. The reason why is because this is glued on all four sides. It has a little bit of a section here that's not glued to where I can pull up the paper to get to the next sheet. But the reason why I love that is because if I'm adding a ton of water, just like anybody who does watercolors, sometimes your paper is going to buckle, sometimes it's going to move. This keeps it nice and flat, and then once it's dry, it tightens back up and becomes nice and flat. This is also going to help me not have to have any weird lumps and bumps when it comes to my watercolor washes, which are the ones right here at the top. Now, watercolor washes is essentially when you take the ink and you mix it with water. And we're gonna do that, and we're gonna get a couple different variations here. I'm gonna show you actually how to get all these different variations of washes, because it goes down from like one is actually, there is a wash there, it's not just water. It's very, very light. And then it gradually gets up to the pure ink right here. But before I jump into that, because I'll probably go over that last, I want to go over the other techniques that we can use when it comes to the India ink. Now, the India ink that I'm using today, it comes in actually 3 different sizes. These are just the 2 that I happen to have here. This is 1 fluid ounce, this little tiny bottle. This is great for if you're using dip pens, which is what I'm going to be using mostly today. So I'm going to be using a glass dip pen, which means I don't have any other different kind of nib. It's just the one size. But if you're interested in doing something more like calligraphy, they have other options as well where you can swap out these little different, the nibs here, and they're metal, and it comes with the holder. And then you can get different types of tips, like this one right here is a little bit wider. There we go, you can see it that way. This is a little bit wider, so it lends well to calligraphy, where this one is really fine, so it lends well more to drawing. Interchangeable, again, we are artists, we are going to use them in all different types of ways. But that's what this jar is really, really great for. If you open it up, I honestly will just have it sitting here, and I will just dip my pen into it and keep working that way. So there's that. And then there's also, this is the 16 ounce bottle. There's also a 32 ounce bottle, which is double the size. It's all the same ink that's inside of it, but this is really great if you're working in ink washes and you make a lot of ink washes all at once, especially if you're doing the different gradations. One thing that I actually really love to do is put them in separate bottles like this. Now, I did not do that for the show because I'm going to make this a little bit harder on myself, and we're going to make the washes today together. But if you are doing artwork with washes, it is really almost kind of difficult to get the same exact tone of gray every single time, unless you are really patient and really working on those gradations. And I'll show you today, like I can get 1 through 4 relatively easy. This, like these darker ones, I have a hard time getting to these because I'm like very cautious when it comes to adding the ink into my water, and I never get dark enough until like a couple tries usually. But that's me personally. But if you work in washes all the time, this is a really great way of keeping your washes already set to go. So this is called a flow line bottle. I believe it's called flow line bottle. The creative inspirations. Yeah. So this is a flow line bottle. Sorry, we have a couple different bottles. Some of them are a little smaller with like little pointy nibs. This is the one that has I'm gonna open this off camera so I don't get ink everywhere. It has a pour spout essentially and a little cap. I love this. So if you have all your washes, like you can just put tape on there and label it as like wash number 1, and you'll be able to get the exact same gray consistency out of that bottle every time. Now then you'll have to refill it, but it's a lot less than having to just make it every time you sit down. But that's going to be the washes. So let's go over some basic line work techniques as far as using the dip pen. Now before I jump into that, do we have any questions?
I have just 1 or 2.
Okay.
Literally just 1 or 2.
Okay.
Gigi said that she inherited some India ink and was wondering if it goes bad in general.
Ooh, I don't think India ink does go bad. The only thing that it probably could do if it does go bad is get moldy, but that's if you're introducing, because usually when they make them, it's not made with like anything that has bacteria in it. The bacteria can be introduced when you're using it. So like if you mix it with water, or like you dip a dirty brush or something into your actual pure ink, that's the only time that I could see bacteria getting introduced, and it could develop a mold. that's the other thing actually that does remind me. If you're making washes and storing them like this, use distilled water. That way there isn't any chance that this will mold inside of there. Same thing if you're using like water brushes. That anytime you store a good amount of the India ink mixed with water, use the distilled water, because that's just over time you won't have that bacteria issue.
And then the other question was, Ginger was wondering if there was any problem that you experienced with bleed through when using a block.
Not with India ink, no. That's why I like using the watercolor blocks, because they're actually made to receive a lot of watercolor paints, and the ink isn't going to be any different than the watercolor. And actually, you know what? Before I do work on this, I'm going to actually show you guys with my palette here. I am going to make a quick wash here, because I want to show you. I'm just using, this is actually just sink water. The issue with mold or anything isn't going to happen over time with this, because once I mix this, I'm going to be immediately using this, and then it'll just evaporate. Let me do one here. I'm going to just go ahead and fill these up here, because I'm not going to need them. Might as well. Okay, so dip pen. So the way that I typically make washes quickly, I'm going to actually just use my dip pen here, and I'm going to dip it into the ink. Now, what's really cool is that because of the surface tension of the ink, and actually here, let me hold this up here. You guys can actually see, and actually, ooh, yeah, let's go to that side camera here. Let me pull this back down so you guys can see. You can see with that nib, it has ridges on the glass pen. That ink pulls up into those ridges, and that's what's holding this. So it's not going to drip off, you know, unless I like vigorously shake it, kind of a thing. But it's pretty on there, and this is what's going to keep the ink loaded and ready for me to keep going as far as creating artwork. Now, I'm going to just touch it to the water, and you see how quickly it's going to mix in there. Now, I also don't want to drop this, but I'm going to just spin it here, which actually mixes it really well with my water. And you can see most of the ink actually just pulled off of there. This is just a mix now. So when it comes to, I'm gonna just rinse it off in the water. That's one thing you do need to know with the waterproof ink, is that you do want to keep your nibs relatively clean. All I did was I just swished it around in water, and I took a rag and I just kind of twirled it in there, and it pulled most of it off. It's not perfectly clean, but that's okay. Now I'm going to, because ink is a bit of my nemesis, I'm gonna just put the cap on that and not get it all over me. When it comes to paper, and we can actually go back over to that overhead. I wanted to talk to you guys a bit about paper, because when it comes to ink techniques, similar to watercolor, your paper is gonna matter. I just have a selection here of random things that we have. A mixed media pad is great. It is going to be great for when you do any kind of a dip. Actually, all of this paper is going to be great for the dip pen technique, when you go straight from ink onto your paper, right? It's wonderful for that. Absolutely fantastic. Now, the difference between whether or not I would want to use this paper or a watercolor paper is depending on my technique. So if I'm just using a dip pen, this is fantastic. It's also pretty cool that it can take watercolor washes. It's not as great as a watercolor paper, because I believe this is a little bit thinner. Yeah, this is only 90 pounds. So the watercolor block is going to buckle less than this. But when, again, dip pen techniques, it's great. But over time, this is going to start doming and having a little bit of a bubble. I'm going to put that off to the side, and we'll show that a little bit later. This is a colossal sketch pad. Also really fantastic for that pen and ink kind of dip pen techniques. I'm going to take this. It actually flows really well. It's nice and smooth. Works great. It does not work great for washes. Initially, looks fantastic. This is gonna buckle like the dickens. It is going to buckle so quickly and so bad that, and again, I'm gonna put this off to the side and we're gonna review it later, but as you can already see, you see how my ink is pooling right there in the middle? That is because this paper is starting to buckle. When it comes to washes, you want something that doesn't move on you. That's why I'm using my watercolor paper. And again, this also is pretty on the thinner side. This is only 75 pounds. So this one you might have some bleed through, even though for a sketch paper, it's actually on the thicker side. But this is where this is not the kind of paper you want for this. This is actually more intended for like dry media. Granted, if this is all you have, it still works great for the dip pen technique. Again, I will put that over there. Actually, let me get that out of the way. Marker paper. Again, we're artists. We have all kinds of different things around. This is very similar to the Colossal sketch pad in the sense that it actually does work really, really wonderfully. Because this is even smoother, I think, as far as the surface than the Colossal. And using the dip pen is really satisfying. It's actually quite lovely to write on as a surface. It is really bad as far as the washes are concerned. I think this buckles probably the worst. Now, granted, keep this in mind. If you want to do a drawing on here with this, and then go on top with marker. Actually, I don't know if the alcohol ink would reactivate that. Because it is, I don't think it would because it is waterproof. We're going to try this later on. Again, I'm going to leave this, but like, again, do you see how bad that is buckling? That is going to be a nightmare if you're trying to get a smooth gradation wash. This is not ideal. But if you want to do a drawing with your ink pens, your dip pen, and then put marker on top, I believe that would actually work really well. I don't know if this is fully dry. I am gonna leave this off to the side because I believe this is dry down here because it's a little bit thinner, but that, I don't know. Again, you might have, actually it's not bleeding through at all. I'm very impressed with that. love when that surprises you. And then last but not least, I have Bristol. This is the Soho Bristol. Sorry, it's a little bit larger. That happened to be what I grabbed. Again, this is similar to like mixed media in the sense that it can actually take quite a lot, but it can take a limited amount of water. So again, with the dip pen, very satisfying. Very ASMR. I'm gonna probably be saying that all of the time during the show. But again, for the washes, you can get an okay wash here. It's not gonna buckle anywhere near what the Colossal or the marker paper is gonna do. It is gonna buckle a little bit because it is not intended for a ton of water. So it's just one of those things to kind of keep in mind. Now, I'm going to attempt this marker paper here real fast. I'm gonna just try it down here because I know this is dry. Let's give this a whirl. Let's go with Shock Pink because we're in our pink era. Again, I didn't let this dry very long, but it's actually laid down pretty well. I feel like if I keep layering it, yeah, I'm starting to see a very slight smudge. Again, I think if I let this dry fully, it's gonna actually do really well. But like, that's pretty fun. So yeah, you can actually do a quick little color study that way. Good to know. Okay, so dip pen techniques. Let's jump back over to that now that we've gone over paper. Do we have any questions? Okay, we have questions. All right, before I jump to this then, what's the questions?
Okay, first, one of our YouTube viewers has some India ink that they inherited, and it's kind of gelatinous.
Not good.
Salvageable.
Your India ink shouldn't be jelly. But us being artists and us not wanting to waste anything, I would say I personally would not do anything that you're going to want to sell. I just don't know how long that's going to stand the test of time. Like, it's not something that really, it's an archival media because of the fact that it's a carbon-based, like soot-based ink, and it's just made to be archival. But because it is a weird consistency, I just can't tell you how long that's gonna last as far as like being able to work on like a paper consistently, like it should work. It's not gonna flow or move around on the paper like it's supposed to. Worst comes to worst though, it doesn't work, but you can attempt to mix some water into it and see if that makes it any better. But good luck. I would just use new India ink. It should be ink consistency, like water. So yes, more questions?
Yes, James would like to know if you can use this ink under watercolor washes in a sketchbook.
Okay, again, just like I was showing you with the other papers, this is something to know. I don't know what kind of sketchbook you have, but you're gonna want some heavy duty paper for this if you're going to use washes specifically, because you can use watercolor on top of even the washes here, which is actually quite lovely. It can darken your values, and you can just do a quick watercolor wash and just tint things really, really wonderfully after you've already gotten the value studied down. But within your sketchbook, if you are doing like a line drawing, absolutely. This is not going to move once it is fully cured and dry. That's why I'm saying, like, you need to fully let it dry, because if you put ink down before it's dry, it will move because it's not set yet. Any other questions before I jump into pen techniques? Okay, well, so I'm going to stick with the glass pen, and somehow I already got ink on my hands. Katie's not allowed to touch the ink though, because it's your nemesis.
I love it.
It's beautiful, but it doesn't love you.
My college couch can attest to that.
Oh no.
And the carpet.
Yeah, listen, I've had those, this is why I like to keep the cap on my ink, because it's just a media that likes to jump for some reason. I was actually using a bottle of ink similar to this in college, and I think I had my art was in my lap, my laptop was here, the bottle was there, and it just jumped across all three in like a circular motion. It got my computer, my artwork, my lap, the chair, and the floor. And it just was like, hey, I'm here. And that's what
staying
it does.
For a real long time.
It does. I mean, granted, the only thing that I was like, oh no, was my computer. And I got it mostly out of that. I think there was like one button that was a little sticky, but you know.
My computer, my couch, my floor, and my art.
Yep.
And when I moved, it stayed there.
Yeah. Okay, so dip pen techniques. I'm going to stick with the glass pen because it is just really fun for me to use. Although you can absolutely use any of the nibs with the holders. I did include them in the teacher's cart for you guys. They have all different types, so please go explore those. But for me, I'm going to use just the glass pen here. And so when I dip in the just the nib, just the little end, it's only loading just a little bit. And if I dip it further up, it's going to give me a lot more ink. This is something that you're going to have to play with, because dipping just a little bit will get you a good amount of lines. But if you dip too much, you'll start getting thicker lines, which is consistent. But when you're using the nibs, since they have that flexibility, you can have a lot more inconsistency with your lines like this. But when it comes to doing straight lines like this, that is called hatching. Now, fairly simple addition to that is cross hatching. So all you do is just crisscross it, right? You just go the other direction And now you got some cross hatching. Easy enough. Now, within a form, and actually let me put that in my water real quick. I'm gonna actually do a little bit of a sketch here, because within a form, right, we're gonna do a sphere, little ball. What you can do is start doing contour, where it's hatching or cross hatching, but it goes with the shape of the form. So since this is a ball, pretend like that was one line, I can actually start going around the form like that. It's not an exact ball, and my hands are a little, it's hard to draw without having to lean forward and get my head in the shot, so please be kind to my poor sphere. But let's say I start trying to show you a little bit of something like that. Yeah. There's a highlight on there now. Now, if I want to start getting more of the shadows, I can start going in between and giving it more of a core shadow, where I'm starting to actually darken just one little area here, and I can start creating the form in that sense. Now, with the cross hatching, I can even go the other direction, and it's not a perfect sphere, but you know, she's trying. But it's one of those things where you can actually start developing the form just with lines. And it's starting to create that three-dimensionality with just the hatching and cross hatching. But again, you don't have to go with the form. It's just something that is something kind of like, I've seen a couple artists where they do this across a face, where it's a single line and it follows the contour of the face, and that assists with you understanding the three-dimensionality of a form, which is really cool. But it's not something that's absolutely required. You could just use straight lines too. Now, when you start breaking it up like this, that is called broken hatching, where you essentially just are making spaces in between to give you kind of like almost a negative shape. Now, where this is kind of my personal favorite, I have an example. And I wanted to show you this. That's upside down. Okay, so this is, sorry, I was turning it the wrong direction. Okay, so this is an example of broken hatching, in the sense of me using that for the clouds. So the negative space is actually what's making up the clouds. So, I mean, I even put in like a solid little landscape here and like the diagonal, just so you can see the difference between the land plane and then the sky plane. And actually you can see I even did like the in-between to give you some more shadows, kind of the same idea with the hatching. And it's not cross hatching, it's just hatching. But to get that, because I am not great at straight lines. I'm really not. I even tried to freehand it over here a little bit, and it, as you can see, it didn't work out so well. Now, if you're like me and you're not great at drawing a straight line, I know everyone's like, I'm not an artist, I can't draw a straight line. Neither can we, I promise. We're not great at it either. Anybody who can, I'm impressed. It's a hard thing to do. But when it comes to me drawing a straight line, I just am not great at it. My hand wants to go weeble wobbly, and that's the technical term of the day, weeble wobbly. But if you're not great at it, lean into it or find a way to assist yourself in getting those straight lines. Now, when I say lean into it, I mean if you drop a wobbly line, draw more wobbly lines. If it looks intentional, that was your intention, not an accident. And that's how you can lean into kind of having that quirkiness where it's hand done and it still looks intentional. Now, for the rest of this, I used a ruler. because I'm just not great at drawing straight lines. So I wanted to have a couple of perfectly straight lines now. Actually, we're gonna have to probably go to that side camera because I am gonna have to lean forward for this one. So let's make sure that this is on camera. There we go. Okay. Maybe I'll turn it this way so you guys can see a little bit better. Okay, so what I did is I actually am making sure to use my ruler straight up. The reason why is because I have some cork on the bottom here. This is going to lift it just ever so slightly, because normally when it comes to me drawing straight lines, I actually do this upside down. The reason why is because I want my edge as close to that paper as possible. When it comes to ink, you want to flip it because you don't want it touching your paper, otherwise you could have some bleed issues. So I can see where that last line was. I can see where I kind of have my clouds doodled in. And the way that I actually did that was I took a pencil and just sort of roughly sketched it, and then I took a finer pencil and I made the outline of that a lot bolder. So like it's a sketchy mess, and that's okay. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just pull my ruler down just a little bit further. And I am gonna have to lean in. I'm sorry for this. If you can see the top of my head, I'm sorry. And I'm going to dip my pen in. Again, I don't want a ton of ink on here because if I really load this, this nib up, it's going to want to flow all along the edge of my ruler. And then I'm going to just touch in just the spots around the clouds.
And can you flatten your hand that's holding the ruler?
Sorry, I'm trying.
I know.
This is a really hard thing to do. All right. I might be able to draw another line and make it the other direction, but you can see how I just drew around it. Yes, we have a question?
How do you keep the ruler edge from smudging ink from previous lines?
This is actually what I was going to show you. Actually, let's go back to the overhead camera. So I now have ink all along the edge of this, right? Take a easy wiper and just wipe it off. It actually, because of that, the cork, it doesn't pick up a whole lot, but it does have just a little bit of ink on the edges when I finish a line. And then I always just take a rag or a paper towel and just kind of run it down the edges. And as you can see, I've been doing that a couple times. So it's just an easy way to keep the edge clean. Yes, do this every single time I am making a line. And actually, let's try and do it overhead like this. I'm gonna probably just, let me lean in to get it lined up, and then I'll move my head out of the way as best I can. Okay. It's hard to line it up when it's flat on the table. Okay, so also pay attention to the nib of your ink pen, your dip pen. If it's getting too clumpy with ink, you're gonna wanna rinse it and kind of reload it that way. It never hurts to kind of reload it. Again, just a little bit of ink up against the edge of that ruler. And I actually think I forgot this one. So I'm gonna just do a little bit there. All right. This is really hard to do and not see what you're doing. All right, and then for the little in-between areas where I'm trying to define the edge of a cloud. Yep, see, I just got it smudged. Dang it. This is what happens when I move my ruler and not pick it up. That's something you do need to know. I smudged. That's okay. It's all right. I can go back over that with white ink if I need to. Or even white gouache. That is also a totally acceptable option. But I wanted to show you in between those little clouds, like right here, you can see the little dots. That's how I'm defining those little edges, just to get a little bit of definition between them. Do you have a question?
Edie actually mentioned that even if you make a mistake, you can claim it was intentional because nobody will know the difference.
How would they know? No one's gonna know. And if it happens, then just make that mistake over again. Just put it in another spot. I mean, my lines are not perfect over here. That's okay. And that's one of those things that if you got even the FW acrylic ink, it comes in white. You can pop that on top of here. And this is one of those things that if I wanted to, I can scan this in and even digitally remove that. It's not the end of the world. I can reprint this and have posters, or I can even just remake this. We are artists. We can always make another one. I'm not great at this technique, as you can see. It's just something to play around with and test and try. Now, I'm gonna close the ink because again, it's making me nervous. Half of the show is me closing and opening the bottle of ink, and I'm okay with that because it's not everywhere. So when it comes to this right here, to finish it off, all you have to do is take an eraser and erase out your pencil lines. Tap that because I don't know that ink or that last line I drew is, yeah, I missed a spot. Whoops. I missed a little bit of a line down here. But yeah, that's how you can get those little broken hatching marks where the negative space is what actually creates your image. And then you can contrast it with just pure ink. And I think that's a really lovely way of getting essentially like 3 tones without actually having to draw or paint 3 different values. Or paint 3 different values. You're drawing it at that point. So really fun little technique. I hope you guys try it. Hopefully you're better at drawing straight lines than I am. But that's broken hatching. Now we are coming to my all-time least favorite. I'm sorry if you guys are really into this. It's just not my jam, but it's stippling. Michaela can attest. I was dying when it comes to stippling. I don't know why. It's just not my thing. It's just not my thing. And it takes a lot of patience.
There's patience level required?
So. ASMR. Stippling. It is one of those things that if you get a good concentration of dots, this is again pure ink. So if you get a good concentration of dots, it appears darker. And then if you space them out, it appears lighter. Now, nobody said you have to use pure ink either. What you can use is washes. Ooh, that's the one thing to know about washes is it does want to flow off your nib a little bit faster because of the surface tension of water being a little bit different of the ink. So I cannot slam it down like I was doing it before. It's one of those things that you have to be a little bit more gentle, but stippling with a lighter tone. So what's cool is that you can actually layer these. Excuse the one dot. It's just, ignore that. But you can actually layer the stippling in the different values of washes that you use and come up with an entire image like this. Well, this isn't all stippling, but this is stippling. Do you see why I was going a little crazy? But I actually made this image because I wanted to show you guys all of the different techniques all in one. So I'll kind of show you, other than the stippling, I'll show you kind of around here where I was using the other techniques once I go over the last couple. Now, if you're like me and you really don't have the patience for stippling, the next one's great. Scribbling. Scribbling is my jam. Scribbles. It's just so much fun. It's one of those things. Now, what I did actually show here on my swatch page here, This is round scribbles. This is more of a jaggedy scribble. You can go all in between. And actually, speaking of, since I have this over here, where it is appropriate in like imagery like this was like the bushes. It absolutely lends well for foliage. Like it was perfect for that. Again, you don't have to use pure ink. This is different washes that I scribbled on top. I started with a lighter wash, and just like watercolors, you work from light to dark. So I started with a light wash, scribbled it in to kind of define my form, and then got darker and darker and did probably about 4 layers of scribbles on here just to define that little bush. But scribbling is great for any kind of foliage, especially if you're just, you got a lot of foliage and, you know, scribble it in there. It's great. All right, so the next one is actually quite fun. It's called, well, I guess, I don't know, it should be called bleed in. I think it's called bleed in. I think that's the technical term. But when it comes to, I'm gonna actually pull my water a little bit closer here and maybe scooch this back, because I'm gonna make a mess if I don't. So bleed in is where you have an area that is saturated. And when it comes to working on watercolor paper, what I do suggest is actually get the area wet and let it sit for just a second. Then go back over it with more water, because that way it's really saturated, right? And then you can either take your brush or a nib, and you can actually have it bleed into that water. And then if you really want to, you don't have to stop there. What you can do is start working it into that area as well with your brush and kind of keep moving it around, or you can let it kind of do its own thing. That's the fun part, is that you can absolutely have it do all kinds of different fun little, almost like blooms, which are really fun. You can have it go from light to dark. You can have it kind of go all over the place, as far as like if you get a little bit more ink and kind of touch in on this corner. That doesn't want to move very far because the water is limiting it, because it's not actually very saturated right now, but there you go. So it can move around quite a bit. You can actually pick it up and start moving it that way. It's one of those things, it's like happy accidents, and it's really hard to control water when you do it this way, but you can have some really lovely results. Now in this piece, where I actually used it was right here. I got this entire area wet and just started putting black ink right here and letting it kind of bleed in. And then I took lighter washes. After I let it fully dry, I took lighter washes and went over top of it and got the definition of the cliffs and that little river kind of running through. Almost like painting it with watercolor, again, working from light to dark. Other than down here, I just let that be pure black. So that was a really lovely way of getting that gradation. And also, if anybody's interested in the image that I was using to make this, I know my amazing moderators, Amanda and Frida, have the link, and they will pop that in the chats for you in case you want to try and draw this yourself. Also, fun fact, there's a little person right here on the cliff. I don't know if you can see that. He's hanging out in the crate. I even drew his little hand up like, hey. It's so cute. He's tiny, but it's a little like hidden, makes me happy. All right, so that was most of the techniques other than the washes, and I wanted to kind of go over how I make the washes as far as getting all the different values. Now, do we have any questions, comments, concerns? Please, nobody asking me to do more stippling.
You would like more stippling.
No! How did I know you were going to immediately go to stippling?
I have one for my own self. Anytime I do it, I find myself accidentally making patterns. Like, it's not random. Is there a way you would say that you could beat that? Do you understand what I'm saying? It's your brain.
I think that's honestly your brain, yeah.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where if I notice myself making patterns, like if again, that water just wants to flow off of there really fast. If I end up making like almost like the perfect spacing between them and it looks too much like a pattern, hopefully you guys can see that, sorry. I will actually start intentionally clustering, which even could be a pattern. But that's one of those things that if I notice I'm doing it, I try to just not consciously. But if you're layering your stippling like this, then honestly, you probably will not notice it because it's so many layers. Also, this was stippling, and then I put washes of watercolor, or the watercolor, of the ink on top. So this was a combination of the stippling and the washes. It's one of those things where you can do a combination of those two to get kind of this effect where it looks like I covered the whole thing in little dots. I did not. I could not. This would kill me. Absolutely not. No question?
We do. How would you preserve this piece of art that you have completed?
So you can actually address this similar to watercolors where you can frame it under glass. But this actually, because it is waterproof, and I'm probably going to freak you out a little bit right here because I have a bunch of water on my brush, right? It ain't moving. It is not going to move whatsoever. So it's one of those things where, like, you could, if you really wanted to, have this exposed without glass. Because the reason why you put watercolor specifically under glass is because you want to make sure that that watercolor isn't going to reactivate, as well as like the UV protection, things like that. If you want this UV protected, you can, but it's a pretty archival quality material. Now, the only time I would suggest maybe under glass is also because of the paper, because this is hard to kind of frame without a piece of glass. It doesn't, it's going to have some effect with the humidity. So glass is really your best bet, but if you really wanted to, you could mount this to a panel with adhesive. I would suggest the Yes Paste. We have an entire show on mounting watercolor paper to a panel. It was part of, I think, even our Canvas Palooza. The same process of mounting canvas to panel, same thing with watercolor. We have a question?
Yes, two.
Okay.
How long did it take you to do that? And then also, is it light fast?
It is light fast, yes. It is very light fast, so this isn't going to have any, again, very archival material. It does not fade with time. And this took me days. Days. That's why I was like, I was really hoping to be able to show you kind of the different techniques with this, and I was like, there's no way. With the amount of layering that I did with this, it just takes time. Because like if you see right here, the cliff alone, I did the hatching for the little, hopefully you guys can see that, like different areas of the rocks where you can see the light hitting it. Where the shadows are is where I started doing that, the hatching. And then I started doing a combination of hatching and some scribbling down here. Just to kind of get that like really jaggedy rock kind of area happening. And I tried to make sure that I kept my lines kind of going the same way, where it was either vertical or that like horizontal that was going at that one direction. Just to be kind of consistent. It's one of those things. But that's why I wanted to show you all the different kind of techniques. And then the washes were what I did up here in the sky. Now, I am going to actually start preparing the washes. So, when it comes to trying to get, I'm going to actually just flip this upside down so you guys can see both. This is more important though. So trying to get these values right here. I have a ton of different wells here. I love this palette when it comes to trying to get a gray study kind of going. And I'm going to actually put just a little bit of water here. So, washes. I'm going to try and keep my washes in order because me being me, I need to set up my palette to where my brain can check out when it comes to knowing which one is which value. So I will start with 1 in the corner. That'll be 2, that'll be 3, that'll be 4, 5, 6, and then pure ink will just remain in the jar. I have to set up my palette like that. Otherwise, I will never remember which one's which at all. Again, this is why pre-mixing your washes and keeping them in the little bottles, that way you can just drop them in, great. But when you're mixing them yourself, for the very first one, I dip just a tiny, tiny amount of the nib in the water. Again, if you just start swirling this, because of the grooves of that nib, it tends to mix it. And I can tell you right now, that's too dark. This is why I wanted to show you exactly what it takes sometimes to get these washes. So what I will, excuse that, just dripped in some water, which is fine. What I'm gonna do is actually take my pipette. This is a lifesaver when it comes to doing these in like smaller batches. And I'm gonna actually squeeze out a little bit of it, and might as well put it in there. And then I'm gonna get some fresh water and squeeze this in, because I need it lighter. Spin it around. Now, the other thing I always have are just like swatches on my little scrap pieces of paper. This is the one that I was using for this image. Actually, they all are. So these are the kind of colors that I'm going for. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my brush and I'm gonna check my value. Now, I'm gonna do a good amount of water on there. And you see how that looks a little bit darker than this. Hopefully you guys can. That looks a little bit darker. When it comes to washes with India ink, they do tend to dry a shade lighter. So, something just to be aware. It's one of those things. Now, for the second one, I'm going to do essentially the same thing. Just touch a little bit of that in there. And I'm looking for a slightly darker shade. And I think I got it pretty spot on. You should see it's ever so slightly darker. Now with the third one, I am going to dip a little bit further into the nib. And I'm going to actually just do that. And the back end of your brush is also great to mix it, if you're just not sure if you got too much ink in there, but I think I'm actually good. And if we have any questions right now, this would be a great time. I'm just...
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Would spray varnish affect the ink?
No. It might change the sheen, but it will not affect the ink.
When you're done,
yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
when you're done mixing all of those various shades, what do you do when you're done with your piece and you still have ink left in those wells?
Normally, I rinse it down the sink, because it is the material in this ink is an organic material, like a stick that's been burnt and ground down and mixed into an ink. Now, if you guys are really concerned about putting this down your sink, what you can do is just collect it and then drop it off at a like a dump in your town. That's one of those things that you absolutely can, but this is not harmful. Yes.
What if you wanted to save it?
That's what I was saying. You can absolutely use something like this. You can pour it right back in there. I would, when I say pour it in there, I'm going to mean use a pipette, squeeze it up, because you're not going to be able to pour all of it unless you want it all into one. I mean, that's also possible. But it's one of those things where, like, if you already have them pre-mixed in this, you can absolutely save it. You can also, because, like, as you're rinsing, I'm essentially making another amount of wash over here. I couldn't tell you which value that is, but, you know, if I were to test it at the end of the show, I could do that. Now, if you look over here, this one right here looks ever so slightly darker than that, but it's not quite dark enough. The reason why is, like, I can see right here, this has a darkness to it that this is not quite reaching. And if this right here, while it's wet, is not dark enough, it's going to dry lighter. So I need to add just a little bit more ink. Alright, and then this is why I have, like, all the swatches. I'm going to do a little bit of another tester right here. See how that's a little bit darker? Perfect. because once it dries, it's going to come down quite a bit. Now, I think this one is already ready. Look at that. Made it. Yes, we have a question?
Can India ink be used with a calligraphy pen?
I'm so glad you asked. We always get that question every time we have an ink show. So, calligraphy ink is 9 times out of 10 not waterproof. The reason why is because those cartridges or the inks or the pens that you can like fill up with ink, you need to be able to clean those. The reason why is because the ink's going to flow through them. The waterproofness of this ink can clog it. And once it's dry, it is not going to come out of there and you will ruin your pens. So it's one of those things that you can use it if you immediately clean it. And I mean like the second you are done. I still would not recommend you do that.
That goes for dip pens too.
Yes, dip pens as well. So if I were to dip this pen into this ink and let it sit there, it's gonna have I'm gonna have a really hard time getting it off my nib. And there is a point where I know you can kind of soak it. Like I will say with the porcelain palette, I've let this just air dry and it's just had like all of the ink dried and caked at the bottom of my porcelain palette. If I just put it in water, it kind of detaches from the porcelain. The that's not the pen, that was the pipette, sorry. The nib might do that to a certain extent, but you're gonna have a hard time cleaning that. So that's why you're gonna wanna have like a cotton rag, like an easy wiper or a paper towel. So like as you're drawing, again, if you start noticing that it's starting to get caked up on there, swish it around in water, wipe it off, and get it back to 0, and then keep going. It's one of those things where you're gonna want to consistently keep it clean because once you get it caked on there, it's gonna be real tough to get it off.
But that's not to say don't use your dip pen with it. It's
Yeah.
just take care of it. We
Yes.
wouldn't recommend you use your ink well pens, like where you put the ink in it.
Yes, dip pens are meant for this, and they're
Right.
great for this. Just
just
again,
have
one
to
of
be
those things.
diligent, yeah.
Yes, diligence. Diligence is key. That word. But a calligraphy pen is not ideal. Now, if you want to do calligraphy with these, you do have a dip pen option where there's all kinds of different nibs that you can use. And again, just be diligent on keeping it clean. No question?
Yes, your squeeze bottle here, the Flow Expressions bottle.
Yes.
How do you pre-mix your large batches like that?
Exactly like I'm doing here, but you're gonna wanna fill this up with water first and then slowly drip in your ink. So like this is actually just pure ink. So what I would do is I'd have this and I just drip in 1 drop and then shake it and see where it lands. If it's too dark, then I would split that bottle between another bottle and then add some water and then just go back and forth, and eventually you will land in a happy medium where it's going to be that right shade that you need it to be. And then any excess that you have will just be in an additional bottle, and then you can start adding more ink and more water to that and then get the next shade. Now, for this last one, this is the one I struggle with the most. And the reason why is because I feel like I never get it dark enough. And actually what's funny is I don't even think that this one is dark enough now that I'm looking at it. I feel like it might be a little too light because this appears pretty dark, but again, it's gonna dry a little bit lighter. And I wonder if I can get this off or dry in time. Let me see, where's my brush? Where's my brush? Okay, so this one should appear almost pure black. Actually, yeah, that's probably, look at that, I got it. I'm so impressed with me right now. That does not happen. I have been struggling with that value over and over and over again. So that is still going to dry a little bit lighter, which I know these are all wet, which is funny. But if I hold this up here, you can see what I mean. Those values are going to shift a slight, like lighter. Once that water either soaks into the paper or evaporates off the card or off my scrap piece of paper, and this is watercolor paper, by the way, just scrap that I had lying around. Once that evaporates out, all of that India ink is going to be attached to this paper and is not going to let go, but it is going to shift ever so slightly later because you're going to start seeing the paper come through a little bit more. So now that I have all of my washes, and they should match all of these and be consistent, then I can take, where did my watercolor block go? There. Hey. I can take this and start doing various washes with it. And I will know, if I do a thinner application, it'll give me a little bit lighter. So I do have a little bit of wiggle room with each one. But I have it set up where it is in order from lightest to darkness, or darkest, and I do not have to think about it. I just have to remember where I'm kind of going on my palette, and I can almost check out a little bit, and all I have to focus on are trying to lock in the values of the artwork that I'm creating. And that's the washes. Hopefully that makes a lot of sense and that helps you guys out on how you create your ink pieces. I really hope you guys get a chance to play around with these. Do we have any last minute questions though? Because it's a fun medium. So if you guys do have any questions in the future while we're not live and we've already signed off here, make sure to put it in as a comment, especially on YouTube, because if it's in the live chat I cannot respond, but as a comment I can. So that way if you guys pop it down there, I can always make sure to go back and answer them for you guys. But if you guys get a chance to play with some ink, I really hope you share with the class and go over to our Jerry's Live Facebook group. It is absolutely free to join. It's over 7,000 people at this point, and just a big group of artists who, people who love and share art, who are, there for any questions that you may have. They're very wonderful people, and I hope you guys get a chance to share your artwork over there. You can also, if you post it to any social media, you can also use the hashtag JerrysArtarama, and then we'll see it that way. Now, I do see that we are getting a couple questions. Yes, before I sign off.
Deb wants to know how to not cross-mix their washes.
Sometimes you are going to cross-mix your washes, but considering it's all various shades of black, it's okay. It's one of those things where just kind of do your best, and if it does get a little cross-mix, that's all right. You can always add a little bit of water, or like I did with the dip pen, you can always just dip a little bit of ink and then drop it back down and see if you can get it back to where it needs to be. Again, scrap paper is great to check your values if you need to check it that way. It's one of those things that just try not to, but if it happens, it's not the end of the world. And that's okay. You have another question though?
Yeah, how many, when you do things like this, how many values do you usually set up?
I set up 7. Well, there's also technically 8 because of just pure white. But I set up 7 because there were 7 blocks on this paper. But when it comes to me and my own artwork, 7 actually was really great because I had a good range of value, and I knew that if I had this area and I wanted to darken it, like I was actually thinking about this a little bit earlier. I wanted to darken just the top of this like little mountain cliff earlier. And honestly, this is getting a little bubbly because I have already taken it off my block, and remember I had water all over it, so that's why this is starting to buckle because it still wants to move a little bit on me. But if I go maybe 2, yeah, I can also take a little bit of the water off my brush. Actually, you know what? I think we're gonna go with a 3. Again, it's not like it's really that big of a deal if I cross-contaminate my washes, it's okay. And then I'm going to just kind of touch. That's actually not dark enough. I'm gonna go with a 4. Do something like that. Yeah, Sorry, I completely forgot the question because I got distracted.
It's how many levels?
How many levels? That's right. So this is the thing with washes. This is where I was going with this. Sorry, got distracted. When it comes to ink, especially with washes, there are infinite levels of washes because I just darkened that. Because it is waterproof, I can layer on top and then layer on top and layer on top, just like you would watercolor, only it's not going to move and it's not going to pick up. So if I just want to darken that a little bit later, even tomorrow, I can still come in here, do another wash of this, and it's a totally different level of ink. And it might be an in-between kind of a thing. I'm not approaching this graphically. I'm kind of approaching this as layers of almost like painting. And again, this is the technique where, with the washes especially, you do want to work like a watercolor where you save your whites and you work your way towards the darks. Because once you get pure black, you're not going to be able to remove it. It's not going to pick back up. It's not watercolor. You can't lift it. You can, however, put in white ink, which is now going to introduce a different color because the white ink is going to be different than the white of your paper. So just be aware of that. But infinite washes within just a couple ranges. So as many as you need, essentially. It's all personal preference. You can do 3 if you wanted to and then kind of work that way. But that is ink. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I really do have a love for India ink. It is definitely a very versatile medium. It's just so much fun to play around with, as long as you don't knock it off your table and spill it all around your room. Katie and I have shared experience of that. Also, if you've also knocked your India ink just everywhere, let me know, because I just want to feel like we're solid in the idea that this happens to everybody.
Real quick, Eve
Yes.
pointed out that the big wash on that piece of paper on the right looks like a rabbit's nose,
Oh,
and I felt like everybody
it does look
should
like a
know.
rabbit's nose. I like it. Okay, so that was ink. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you guys get to play, and I hope you guys get to share it with us because I'd love to see what you create. But that was the show, and of course, make sure you join us next week because Michaela is going to be back on, and she's going to actually be on for 2 weeks in a row. So I'm going to miss you guys, but it's going to be amazing because there's going to be Encaustics Part 1 and Encaustics Part 2, a medium that I actually don't know how to use, which is crazy, but Michaela is incredible with it. So I hope you guys are joining us next week and get to see all of the fun things she's going to be doing with Encaustics. So I will see you guys in 3 weeks, and hope you have a great night. Bye!